Hey guys, welcome to another video from the Parrott Bros. Today we're going to be discussing a big topic which is important to quite a few 1.8 turbo owners, and that is running issues. We're going to cover boost issues, general running issues, and I'm also going to go over a few things that you're going to need as a 1.8 turbo owner. Right, let's do the intro and then we'll get stuck into it. Right guys, so in this video what we're going to try and cover is basically anything that's going to cause you an issue which is a common fault. Now there's a few things I will go over, and what I'll try and do is keep it as brief and as basic as possible, because I don't want to fill you with loads of jargon, and at the same time I'll give you some tips and tricks, because what you don't want to do is when you get a running issue is just keep buying new parts hoping to fix it like that. So let's jump into it. Now there's a few key elements that can cause a lot of problems. Now we'll start with the most common one, which is the N75 valve and wiring system, the MAF or air mass meter, which is just after the filter or air box, and then there is general boost piping, as in anything that pushes air around, including the turbo intake pipe and all other vac lines, anything which carries air. Now we'll start one topic at a time, and I'll go over a little bit of detail about that. Now before I go into that, there is two things that I would recommend you buy as a 1.8 turbo owner. The first one is a boost gauge. Now when I bought my car it did not have a boost gauge, but, and I say a big but, I bought it and just assumed that it was slow and a bit sluggish because it has done 180,000 miles and I've used to been driving sort of a 400 horsepower car, so jumping into a little 225 brake car, just assumed that I would be underwhelmed anyway. So it's a little bit my fault. But after about 2 months of getting fed up with it, I bought a boost gauge and fitted a boost gauge, and then realised instantly that the car was in limp mode. So obviously before I even got it mapped or anything like that, I got the fault fixed and it felt like a different car once I'd sorted the problem. So that was key number one. And the second thing that I recommend you get is either a VCDS lead-in software, which can be quite expensive, or there's a cheaper alternative which is an OBD code reader, or a little Bluetooth dongle that you put in and then you can download an app on your phone, and that allows you to check the fault codes. Or if you really fancy it, you can buy something called a liquid gauge. They're not great to get hold of at the moment because they no longer sell them, but basically that also shows you all your fault log codes, and then you can go onto the internet and find out what that code is. So let's jump straight into the first topic, which is the N75 valve. Now I'll just go and grab one to show you. Right, so we are talking all things N75. Now this is the N75 valve, and as you'll note it has, let me try and hold it so you can see it better, it has one longer spout and two shorter ones. Now what I'll do is I'll pop it up on the screen in writing as well, but basically this one goes into your turbo intake pipe, which is the pipe there, which has the air filter and then goes down into the turbo. This is your boost source, which basically goes down and it goes into the charge pipe, which is this pipe, this silver pipe here, goes into the little spout at the top there, and then this one here goes to the turbo actuator, which if you watch my turbo intake pipe swap you will see that on there. So that's basically the three pipes. Now obviously if you get this the wrong way around, that is a problem. If one of the pipes going off of this has a split in, that is a problem. This valve itself can actually break, and is known to break after 50,000 miles on average. So it is technically classed as a consumable part in this world now. Now you can actually test this. It's recommended to test it when it's hot and cold. Now if you have a multimeter with an ohmic value tester, I'll pop the symbol up on the screen so you know what I'm talking about. And what you will do is measure the ohmic value between the two pins. So you'll literally just unplug it, pull the plug out, and then you just pop one on each pin, and then you get a value. Now the value should be between 25 and 35 ohms. Now a lot of people have said, including myself, on older cars I've had before, is that when cold it will measure between sort of 20 and 35, which is fine, but then when hot I've had it measure over 1,000, which means then it's breaking down when it's hot, so that'll give you an intermittent fault. Now if you come to measure it when it's cold and it's damaged, it could just read straight out 100, 200, 1,000, whatever, and that could be just a completely down sensor, it's not working. To check out a damaged N75 valve, You can, so obviously to prove it, if you're accelerating hard and it's cutting out on you, what you can do is unplug the electronic connector from this out of there, which is just literally just 2 squeeze clips, and you just pull it away. Now that will give you actuator pressure, which I believe is between 5 and 7 psi, but it will be constant. You won't get boost cut or anything like that. And that should help you identify if there's an issue with the actual valve itself. Now, the problem I've had on mine, and I'll zoom in just so you can see, is that basically I had actually an issue with the wiring. Now, I have done a temporary fix because I am going to tidy my bay up shortly. And all I've done is basically one of the 2 wires was broken. And I tested the valve tested fine, but I was still getting a problem. Now, the easiest way to test this is with a multimeter. Let me just zoom you out again so you can see the whole bay. So with a multimeter, on the plug that comes out, so you pull the plug out, and then with the car running, you get 2 pins. Now, pin 1 has a value of 11 to 14 volts, which is basically the battery reference. So that's the power supply to the sensor. And then pin 2 is from the ECU, which basically tells it to when to open, when to close, etc. And that will measure 3 to 5 volts. Mine was 3.5. But when I jiggled the cable, because the fault was intermittent, I wobbled the cable, and the actual the value I got disappeared. And then when I did a bit of further research, there was actually some damage in the insulation of the cable, and the cable had actually, the copper inside had broken down and was barely making a connection. So all I've done is basically renewed the cable between the ECU and the plug itself. Now, I'm actually going to get a new plug and repin a new wire into it so it's not messy like it is at the moment, but it is functional, so I can drive it, it works fine, and that has solved the problem. So that is pretty much the N75 valve covered. I would recommend only buying genuine parts. Now, this applies to everything I'm going to discuss today, because you can buy one of these off eBay for £10. The likelihood is it will work, but it won't work for long, and if it does work, it may still cause you problems. You buy a genuine one, I believe they're about £45, £50 from TPS or from a main dealer equivalent, but you will run into a lot less problems in the future, and it will last you a lot longer than any non-genuine one, and you will know that it will work 100% of the time. So this is an air mass meter, and what that has is a sensor in, and it obviously measures the volume of air entering the car. Now, this is a genuine Bosch one. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you can. So that's a genuine Bosch one, and it has an arrow which indicates which way the air is to travel, which is saying this way. So that will go that way round because the air is going into the car. So symptoms wise, if the car feels flat and doesn't feel like it has a great deal of power, very sluggish, takes a long while to get up the rev range, that is a good indicator that the air mass meter or the MAF is broken. Now, a good way of testing this is simply just to unplug the connector. You go for a drive, it will feel smooth, albeit slightly slower, but it should be a lot more smooth compared to what you've been having if you've been having issues with your air mass meter. And that is simply, you just get a flat-headed screwdriver and just pull up that bottom tab. You might even be able to do it with your fingers, and then it just lifts off. If you just unplug that, put it somewhere safe, yep, go for a drive, and if it feels better than it did, there is a good indication that that is going to be your problem. Again, quite common, and always buy genuine, because if you don't, you will regret it in the future. A lot of people have bought second-hand. You can have a little second-hand or a non-genuine, and if you look online, you'll see a lot of people saying that they've had issues with them still, and obviously you don't want to be one of them people. So always buy genuine. So that's the N75 valve covered. That's the MAF covered. So if you're looking for power loss, if you've got a bit of power loss or it's feeling really sluggish, there's a good possibility that's the case. And thirdly, we'll go on to piping. Now, this is a massive one with the 1.8 turbo engine specifically. Now, what I'll do is I'll show you. This is a pipe that we've changed, which comes out of the puck, which is obviously off the breather system, which goes into the turbo intake pipe. Now, this was the original pipe. Now, you can see it's sort of crushed, and it doesn't return from that. So if you squeeze it, it stays flat because it's perished. So basically, under pressure, that could quite easily collapse and cause you issues. Not to mention the fact that there, I don't know how you can see that on the camera, but it started to perish and it's actually splitting. So there's quite a good possibility that obviously could be leaking in the future. It wasn't leaking at the time, but I replaced it because it's damaged. Now, Around your engine you have a lot of pipework which carries air. Starting from obviously where the air comes in, you've got the turbo intake pipe which has the tip which has 2 pipes coming off it. So that's 3 pipes. You've got the air pump, you have diverter valve, the reset valve, which puts the air back into the system. You also have a pipe down the bottom which is a breather for something else. So that's a lot of pipes, and that is just on the turbo intake pipe. Now, moving around the engine, because it's a turbo car and it has intercooler or intercoolers, you also have a red 90-degree elbow off the turbo onto this pipe here. You have the diverter valve pipe there, which goes back to your valve. You then have a pipe here, which goes down onto the intercooler. There's again a pipe from the intercooler to the center pipe, which comes across. And again, you have similar pipe work on this side, which then goes back into the inlet manifold. Now that alone is a lot of pipe work, and there's a good possibility that at some point throughout the life of a turbo vehicle, one of them will either perish, come loose, split, or have an issue. Now also, on top of all of that, underneath here and on the side here is additional pipes. Now that's part of the breather or PCV system, which is the positive crankcase ventilation, which basically takes air from here and circulates it round the car. Now I've just noticed that one of my pipes is actually collapsing here, which means it will need changing, so that is something I will do. But basically there's all these, everything here that's rubber, everything pipework everywhere is all breather systems. Now that can all cause boost issues. Any single leak in any pipe at all which is in this system can cause you a problem. Now the first thing to do is obviously just have a good look around, visually inspect everything, just give it a little squeeze, see if you can see any obvious damage, get a torch, have a good look around, see if anything's rubbing against anything else, because this is an old car. Like this is loose, so that could quite easily be rubbing on that pipe there. This, obviously the turbo, the normal original one can, because again it's made out of rubber, can perish. These are crazy renowned for breaking. I mean, as you can see here, this one's, well you can't see, but this one's actually collapsing already, so that needs replacing. I've replaced this pipe already down underneath here because that was leaking and there was oil everywhere and it was a right mess. So that is the first port of call. Now the second port of call is to get a boost pressure check. So basically either a smoke test or a pressure test, which is where they basically take this off and they'll bung it and they'll put pressure into the system, and then you listen for leaks, because if they'll put it up to say 10 or 15 psi, you will hear a hissing, you'll hear air rushing out of somewhere, and you'll be able to find leaks. Now I'd be very surprised if any stock car which has never had any work and has a boost test or pressure test will not find at least one small leak, because there's so much pipe work, the likelihood of leaking is really high. So that's the first one. Or if you do a smoke test, then you'll obviously see smoke coming out of somewhere. Now if you don't have access to that, or you don't have that, what you can do is start the car, and you may hear a hissing, because when it's sitting there's pressure in the system, so air will be hissing out. You can also get something like either water and soap in a spray bottle and just sort of spray it on somewhere you think might be suspect, or using WD-40, just give it a tiny little spray and listen for the engine note to change, because obviously if it's getting a liquid into the system, the air system, the note of the engine will change. Now if you do that, great, and if you can't find anything, okay, but if you still think you may have a boost leak, take it for a drive, open the windows, and if you drive somewhere quiet, you should be able to hear it sucking air in. Now obviously if you have a big filter like this or a tip, that doesn't help because they are quite loud, but also you obviously want to be listening for sucking. Now again, if you can't do that but you still believe there's a problem, I would recommend getting a boost check, or go to a garage and get them to do a pressure test, or someone on the forum or Facebook. There's loads of people more than happy to help for a small fee. Now that being said, that is pretty much the hose work covered, because obviously all you're looking for is brakes, splits, where it's not quite mounted right, or just where it's perished over time. And it's worth checking, because obviously all these little things, all these tiny little air holes can cause you running issues when you're thinking, especially if it's mapped, you could be putting 18 to 20 psi through it, which is a lot of pressure. And it's quite easy for something that when it has a little split and you put 20 psi on it to open up and let all the air out, which then gives you no boost, or you get an overboost, and then it will put it into limp mode. So That being said, last on a standard car that's likely to cause you number 4 is this, which is the N249 valve, which is basically a pressure valve which deals with the diverter valve. Now what this does is it takes a measurement from the inlet manifold of the air coming into the system, and when you're driving normally, if you're driving and it has more pressure in the system than it needs, it will open the diverter valve. So I used to call it a dump valve. The diverter valve, the recirc valve, and what it will do is it will open it slightly and let some of the excess air out to keep the turbo at the perfect running speed to not cause any issues. Now you can simply just bypass this and run it straight from the inlet to the diverter valve, which is called an N249 delete. If you do some research on that, you will be able to find a how-to guide without any issues, but I prefer to keep it stock because they've put it there for a reason, so it makes sense to keep it there and keep the system working as it should be. Now the easiest way to test that is simply to check the diverter valve. If you think that you might have a dodgy diverter valve, if you can hear it opening or you can hear it fluttering. Now obviously when you're accelerating and you change gear, you should get a big rush of air, which is normal. If you're sort of getting a chattering or a flapping noise, there's a good possibility the diverter's valve's gone. Now if it looks old, for the sake of I think it's about £30 for a genuine one, it's worth changing. Or if you fancy a blingy forge aluminium one, then obviously again it's worth checking. Now the easiest way to check that is to undo both the pipes, the one out of the tip and the one that goes into this charge pipe. Remove this off the top, pull it out, and all you have to do is get something like a screwdriver, preferably not sharp. Maybe use the handle of a small one, and basically just push up the inside and then pop your finger over the top onto the valve on the top, and then when you let go it should snap back into its original position. If it doesn't, or if it doesn't go straight back, then you know there's an issue. So just go over that again. Get the valve out, and then underneath, so in the pipe that comes in the bottom, push it up, and then pop, while you've got it pushed up, pop your finger over the valve, pull your tool away, and then as you let go, the valve should snap back shut, and that should identify that it works. Now if it doesn't snap back, or if it takes a while to come back, then the likelihood is that is faulty. So going over this, generally the 249 valve tends not to break too much, but I'll go into a quick fault finding tip in a minute. So basically you're looking at 249 valve, your diverter valve, your N75, the mass airflow, and general boost and air pipe work around the engine. That is the main things to cover when looking for a boost leak. Now why I said earlier you need a code reader is because all of these things can log faults. Now if the valve is gone completely, it will log a fault. If there's a power issue, again it might log that the valve is broken because there's no power, it thinks there's a problem with the valve. The 249 valve can log faults also for similar things. Now these have been known to log faults even though they still work, and still you'll never have any running issues. So again, worth checking. If you're getting a constant fault but it runs fine, then change the valve. The general consensus with a 1.8 turbo is obviously if you have a boost gauge, you'll know what you should be running. Now stock is between 11 and 14 psi. Well, I think it's between 9 and 12, but we'll say 11 and 14 because it can fluctuate depending on the quality of your gauge. So if you've got a boost gauge, if you're mapped, obviously you'll need to check what you're mapped to, usually peaked at say 21 and holding at 18. And you should know that you've got the boost you need. Now if you don't have that, you have a boost problem. So then you can start doing a bit of fault finding like we've discussed on the other things. Now, and it also might tell you whether you're in limp mode. The other reason you get the code reader, so you've got the boost gauge to check that you've got the boost. If you haven't got the boost, get a code reader or a VCDS, and then you can check what code you've got. That will lead you to hopefully one of the 4 options we've discussed there. So what I'll do is in the description I will pop in the part numbers, the genuine part numbers for all the things that I've discussed today. So should you need to order one, they have them there. And I will also put in a little description as to what we've discussed in the video, like how to check everything. I will put a short description of every single item on there, just so that if you didn't catch it or you didn't get a chance to make a note of it in the video, we'll also pop it there. Regardless of whether your car is stock or modified, all pipes and components can fail at some point if they're not either correctly fitted or just over deterioration of time. So do bear that in mind. Any questions, hit us up in the comments. I'll be happy to help where I can. And if you've got any tips or tricks or anything's happened to you and you've cured it, please pop it in the comments, because it'd be great to hear from you. I'll obviously note it down in my book, which I've had for years, where I've been making notes as and when I've had problems. And also it'd be great for everyone else to hear that information. Thanks for watching again, guys. That's another video from the Parrott Bros.